For those who are remote, we're gonna this is not on. Okay, for those who are remote, we're waiting. Okay, we're gonna wait 2 minutes to see if we can get the audio and the video going, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Just on this, but the presenter's mic should be okay. It's just a chair.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing. Testing 1 2 3. Testing. 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 Testing.
Oh, you're saying they can hear us. So for those who are remote, can you hear us? The chair is okay? Okay, so they're saying they can hear us fine, but it's just the second screen.
I think we echo, or maybe some wires swap.
For those who are remote, can you see the slides being projected that we can see here in the room? Yeah. No, they cannot. Okay, so we're trying to get that fixed for those who are remote.
I wonder if I have to display from here.
It looks like it's being stretched right now. I think maybe just at court the swap on accident.
Hang on, why is I'm sharing the screen? Is that working?
I think it's just coming up.
No, they have some issue with screen share. Not sure exactly what one's doing.
So there's a remote report that they do see the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what
We're it's just not being reflected here.
Screen share is maybe started.
Yeah, I did this. I'm sharing from this laptop, but it's just not coming up there, but it is coming up online.
So you need to swap displays, right?
I don't know, this controls the second display. This
Yeah,
goes to the
we're
second
not.
display.
Oh, no, sorry, the report is, they can see the screen share is starting, they cannot see the.
They're getting the
Right.
same.
So they need to see that one.
Yeah.
So this is what they can see, which is just that second screen.
Yeah.
So they need to see, they need to share this screen.
So I'm sharing this screen right here.
Right, so I think what's happening is he's sharing the one that's on by the wall, not the
They
middle
need to
one.
see that one.
Yeah,
You're seeing what's on the council.
correct,
And you should be seeing what's over there.
correct.
So we need to go
So
into.
maybe this.
But what's interesting is that laptop, oh, there we go.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a setting here.
Setting on the ground. So now if
But now we're seeing the same thing.
All right. We're getting close.
how's that?
Yep, we got it. Yes.
Okay, we can go.
Thank you.
You want to drive this drive? Mike or? Okay. Okay, we're going to get started now. So welcome everybody. This is the RATS session at IETF114. Just a note that we're the note well in terms of just as a review of what the IP rules are for participation in IETF. I think everybody's familiar with this. A few meeting tips as we get started. So we have both in-person and online participants. And so as a reminder to the in-person participants, just to make sure that your, when you're using Meet Echo, to make sure your mic and your video are muted and turned off while you're in the room. And those who are participating remotely, make sure that your audio and video is off unless you're the one that's presenting information or speaking. And use of a headset is strongly recommended. Here's a list of links to the various information that we'll be reviewing today. Most importantly is you can follow along with the meeting materials. You just follow the link for the RATS materials. And then we'll also be taking minutes. We have a need for a second notes taker. So volunteer. Do we have?
Jess, we've got Jess.
Oh, we have Jess. Okay, great.
And Gary.
Okay. So Jess and Gary, thank you very much.
For those who can also help and augment, it doesn't hurt. You guys can look at the hedge doc. It's live.
Yeah. So just follow that link at the bottom. Okay, just as a reminder for code of conduct, essentially be respectful and courteous to everybody here. Make sure your discussions are impersonal and focus on participating for the sort of broader good of the global internet, and encourage your participation. Thank you. So our agenda today is outlined here.
Sorry if I could
Yeah.
Sorry if I could just jump in. Folks are reporting from the remote that the mic is very, very quiet, so maybe a little louder or kind of a little closer.
I'm trying to eat it already. Or I could stand up there.
Yeah, you can stand up. Why don't you stand up? Choices.
There we go. Is this better? Away. Okay. All right. So let's do an agenda bash. We actually have a fair bit of open mic time at the end. But based on the agenda here, is there anything that we should have on the agenda that isn't? Okay. We can deal with that. All right. So
Thanks for the heads up.
yeah. All right. So let's jump into the first presentation, which is going to be Eric Voigt.
Hi there, I might go mask off so you can actually hear this. All right, what's that?
It sounded fine.
All right. Then-
Personal choice.
All right, so go ahead into the slides. It's just a brief update on event stream subscription. Hopefully the slides will appear back on the other screen. I'll talk through them as we get going. The first slide, as this comes up, is just the same thing we've shown in many IETFs for the last couple of years that talks about the relationships of the drafts, the relationship between the architecture draft, the relationship to the reference model draft, and the relationships between the char draft, the subscription draft, and R4C. Now, what the slide's going to show when it comes up is that we have the architecture draft, as you guys know, going through various reviews, and it's progressing well. We have a dependency on Chara, and Chara is now through to the RFC editor's queue, I think, and that's moving fine. Next up is subscription draft, and I think it's about to come up right now. The subscription draft pretty much is ready to progress now that we have a stable architecture, we have a stable EAT draft, and we're also basing it off subscriptions from the NetConf working group, which is going right next door. And what we're going to do now is just we need to write up some information in the security considerations text, and then it's ready for working group last call, because all the other parts I think are stable at this point. And that's pretty much a summary of where we're at. There's not been a whole lot of progress as we've been waiting the closure of the dependent elements. And so in the next months or so, hopefully we can get the security considerations put out to everybody, and then they can go through and do a working group last call review, I hope. I think that's where we're at. So without any slides, I think that was the summary of the subscription draft. I can keep on moving unless anybody has any questions. I don't think there's anything very controversial about it, unless I'm missing something.
Have we had any people review the draft?
Previously, that's how we got here. We haven't had any real reviews in the last probably almost 6 months or so. So certainly it's very welcome to have as many reviews and many people jumping in as possible. That'd be great.
Go ahead, Hank.
Yeah, so this is Hank. Yeah, so the review, I think most reviews have been done on the Yang side, of course, because it's a Yang module. So there are some tooling issues. So if you see errors, these are okay, unless they are not okay anymore. But I think we established this on the list twice. That it's a local tool chain problem and not a problem with the actual Yang module. So don't be scared by that. Having said that, yes, security considerations is one of the last open topics, so to speak. So maybe polishing and updating those. We could trigger other reviews that are not security centric though.
Yeah, I was going to ask, can we benefit if I triggered, or if one of the chairs triggered and Yang?
Please, that would be great.
Yeah, exactly.
That would help.
That's what I was hinting at. Perfect. Cool.
Okay.
That would be awesome. All right, so in the interest of time, because I know we're poking at slides, I'm going to give the R4C slides from memory. Basically, R4C is also progressing. There have been a number of dialogues that have occurred for various areas. One of the big things that's been happening is outside of the working group. And we have Dave Taylor, who's in the room right now. We're hoping to get some stable terminology out of the Confidential Compute Consortium. And we're hoping to go ahead and update the R4Z using the terminology that's been discussed over in the Confidential Computing Consortium. We don't see a need to rush to get the closure until that's closed. Then we'll update the draft there. So that's one of the things we've been trying to do with R4Z. Second thing we've been trying to do with R4C is continue dialogues with the EAT draft on a couple of different topics. This includes things like the security level, which has been sort of going back and forth for a long time, as people know, following the group. And one of the things that has happened, which is a plus, is we agreed, I don't know how many months ago, maybe 4 or 5 months ago at this point, to include a couple different new hardware types in the draft in the next rewrite that match to some of the CPE types that are relevant to some of the use cases driving the EAT draft. So we still have security level stuff open, but we have been able to at least recognize that we need some more hardware types in the R4C draft. The last bit, and I hopefully can bring up the slides for the last slide. Trying to get there. There is dialogue going for what is the right way to integrate with EAT. I do think that we're awaiting some of the disposition on some of the questions in there. We've proposed at least a skeleton for what it would take to put our R4Z claims in EAT syntax, and there was some stuff going in the last slide talking about what those syntaxes might look like. But we're going to wait on the closure of some of the other larger questions with EAT, which I'm sure we'll hear about in future slides. So with that said, I think I've talked about the slides from memory. I don't know if there's anything else people have, since they're not on the screen here, but open up for other questions if people have them.
So my question is, have you gotten any substantive comments on this draft?
We've had a lot of comments early on. It's revved a number of times early on. In the last 3 months, it's really just been iterating on overlaps with the EAT side. So I'd say that there are some now we're there. I think there have been some substantive comments. As I mentioned, we introduced or want to introduce some new stuff as it relates to hardware types. There's been comments and iterations on stuff on the confidential compute side. They haven't been actual debates over single word texts in the R4C, but some of the base concepts have certainly been iterated in the last months. I see Hank waiting here.
Yes, so again, this is Hank. Yeah, that you mentioned the confidential computing consortium. I think review from over there, it would be very appreciated. I think in the last half year, some of the problem statements converged, and as the CCC is relatively application fine, I would say some feedback from that area would be nice. So, yeah. We have to go to them, I assume, and just ask there.
And probably the slide before this one is the one to end on, because that was kind of what we were just talking about, future integration based on, you talked about comments. We had the drafts that I'd look to look for substantive comments would be some claims in evidence and results threads and the profiles threads, which are very relevant to how do we determine integration over time.
Dave? Taylor?
Dave Taylor. So this is on my reading list. I have not reviewed the latest document. I think I reviewed it when it was like draft 00 or something like that in previous IETF.
Mm-hmm.
But so this may be answered in there, but I am one of the people that, yes, I will review this one and may in fact use it. My question has to do with the use of profiles and what the current thinking is, if you can summarize that. So for example, in Teep defines a profile because it has a relying party, and the profile in Teep says, here's what the relying party needs in attestation results. How does that interact with what might be in the AR4SI? Would you have a profile in here, or would you say that this is a template for other profiles to use?
It's a very good question. The question on profiles is a slightly different perspective for how we took the definition of the claims versus, let's say, the way Ietf does the definition of the claims. We, from the R4C standpoint, take the perspective that the definitions of the claims will always be in attestation results, and they should not require a profile for any variation in the meaning of the claims. So we're hoping that where R4Z is used, they would be pretty much the same definitions as used in any use case. In other words, they're not really varying their meanings based on the profile, or so that you'll be able to pick up the claims in a particular profile. And that's the prerequisites for, I guess, the next slide, which talks about design considerations. They certainly can be picked up by profiles. And I have no problem with being picked up by profiles. I'm kind of waiting to see where the profiles discussion comes before trying to adjust any terminology against that.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand the answer that you're saying. The answer is still a bit flexible if needed, but you see this is replacing the need for other profiles for people that use attestation results, that you'd use this or some custom profile. If this didn't work for you, you wouldn't try to use them both together and sort of subclass this or something. I think is your answer currently.
Close. I'd say that there's a valid overlap between the use cases of attestation results, and I don't think the definitions of the trustworthiness claims are flexible. If they're used, they should probably mean the same things everywhere. So you're not really worrying about namespace or other kind of discussions because the definitions are fairly fixed. And I see one question coming in from Lawrence, but that's my belief at this point with R4C.
Yeah, because a neat profile does a lot more than just specify which claims they are, right? There's a whole bunch of other axes that are part of the profile, right? And so is your intent to dictate those there? Because the other variation would be you take the claims out of this one and you use a different variation of like whether it supports the detachable or whatever the term is, or the other variations that are in the profile.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant by template, is it could be augmenting additional claims. It could be changing any one of those other things without touching the claims.
Yeah, if you can go to the slide previous, I'll just close on this question. As you can see, when it's clear how profiles, we're going to be very happy to add a section showing Ietf encodings. In that case, they'd be very open to be used in profiles. So I see no conflict for any of these claims to be used as claims. We're just waiting to see how profiles plays out before putting that text in.
Yeah, so the Lawrence Lindblade. Yeah, so the bulk of the profile issues in Ietf don't really have to do with refinement or meaning of claims. Really, claims shouldn't be varying very much at all. And we would like the definitions of claims to be sharp and broadly understood. So the profile really comes in because of variability in CBOR, variability in choosing CBOR versus JSON, variability in COSE because of all the algorithms that you can choose, variability in HOSE because of all the variability there, and the requirement or non-requirement where it does really apply to claims. It's a prohibition of claims or a requirement of claims, and possibly a refinement of claims. But really, it's about a lot of the other stuff than the actual semantics of a claim.
This is really an Ietf question rather than an R4C question, so I'm happy to defer it. I do think that the meaning of a claim, such as security level changes, whether it's coming from an attester or an endorser or relying party, and there's still a namespace question of how do you interpret object.
But
But we're getting into Ietf here rather than R4C.
No, actually, I don't. I mean, I think AR4RC also has variable syntax for encoding. Like you could encode AR4. I'm sorry, I'm saying it wrong. You could encode that in CBOR or JSON or Yang and all that. So you could secure it with different ways and all that, right? So that's just. Yeah. Okay.
I see the difference between encoding and namespace, and I'm asserting that the namespace is the variation here between different asserters.
So hi, this is Hank. Just as a co-author, I want to make one thing very clear. These claims will never belong in evidence.
Yes, never belong in evidence.
So I think that solves the problem. We can write that into the text very explicitly. Whether the profiling would allow that, in theory. Yeah, okay. I'm just making sure about that.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm letting you guys run a little long, given that we have it in. I think you're up next. The architecture.
I have a few different slides, but I actually have that slide that is what we're working on. And you gotta make sure you use the V2 version. I see, roast right now,
Was there, did you update the V2?
there, right now there's 2 entries in the meeting materials. You want to make sure you pick the one with V2. Michael uploaded them yesterday.
I have them.
It's just that the V2 one have more information on it that we need. It's the actual words to talk about. So, all right. So, let's see. I guess since I'm speaking, I'm allowed to take the mask off, right? Okay. Now I can breathe. All right. All right. So I'm talking about the RATS architecture document. While we're getting it up, I'll just talk to the title slide while I'm delaying here. Whenever there's actually issues to discuss, we had Tuesday morning meetings. And we had a long list of people that showed up at various types of meetings and stuff. Some of them are in the room, some of them are remote. A couple of them are co-authors, but I think we probably had like 15 people, not necessarily on the same meeting, but collectively discussing the various issues that were specific to this document. So we had issues and pull requests that have changed. Okay, here we go. Yeah, that's the stuff I was just talking about. You can see all the list of names on the left. So we believe the design team, being people that show up at the meetings to talk about the specific issues, right, is on the left there. That is, of course, not working group consensus. That's confirmed on the list, but this is the set of people that were involved in presenting what was in the, coming up with the text that's in there right now. All right, so you can go to the next slide. This has already gone through AD review. It's gone through 1 or 2 rounds with Roman. Among other things, here are the things that have changed since 113. Most of them are editorial things that, including, some actual wording suggestions from Roman, which we thought were great. The non-text version now has the nice SVG diagrams, right? So you have some pretty printed diagrams, which you'll actually see 2 of those in the slides. We made some minor adjustments to the terminology in terms of the definitions of things to be more clear. An example, we changed integrity protection, which was also a section heading, to the term conceptual message protection, because it's not just about integrity. So those are examples of things. All right. All those are minor editorial. There's no technical differences there really, other than maybe some clarifications to say what we meant about those technical things. So go on to the next slide. Okay. So there's only one remaining issue in the AD review before things go on. Okay. And this is split between 2 slides because it's in discussion on 2 different diagrams. And this is a long ways away from this mic. So I need to be able to see one of these slides so I can point to stuff, because there's some small print in the diagrams there that people remote can see, but not local. Yeah, I can see that. Okay. Yeah, that's probably not everyone. All right. So the little speech bubble there is Michael's kind of how we think about things, but everything else on the slide that's up above in italics and the diagram is literal in the document. Okay. And so, and I know Roman is here, right? And so I'm going to kind of summarize this, and Roman can correct me because I'm trying to channel what Roman said, and then kind of our discussion about it, right? So in the diagram there, we see this is the passport model diagram, and it shows an attestation result line coming down to an attester, and then an attestation line going to the right over to the relying party. Okay. And Roman looked at that and said, well, that looks like the attester does something with those attestation results. For some definition, it does something, right? And wanted to have more discussion about that. And so the text in italics is actually what the document says about that diagram. Okay, so it says, the attester does not consume the attestation result, but might cache it. Okay, in other words, there might be a time delay between the line coming down and the line going to the right, where it's just an opaque blob that's cached in storage and then sent off in an appropriate time. The attester can then present the attestation result and possibly additional claims if that's encapsulated in some larger message, right, to a relying party. But of course, those additional claims are not in the attestation result. The attestation result is signed, can't be modified. It's an opaque blob to the attester, right? Which then compares its information against its own appraisal policy. The attester may also present the same attestation result to other relying parties. Right, so it's an opaque blob. He's got this ticket that he can kind of present, just like a human has a passport. You can't modify your passport, but you can go to one airport, you can present it, you can then go on to the next airport, you can present it, and so on. Okay, so that's what this picture is trying to describe. Okay, that is cached there as an opaque blob, and then you can show it when you try to get entry into various relying parties. Okay, so that was the intent of this text. Okay, And so that's why the line isn't just a pass through, it actually stops there because it can be cached. It can be modified, but it can be cached and it can then be represented to different relying parties over time as this opaque blob. Okay, that's what we're trying to accomplish with this diagram and with this text. Okay, so now the question is whether you think or anybody else in the working group thinks that additional text changes are necessary to convey that concept. Okay, so we're trying to explain why that line terminates there with that text right there. So this is what the current document says. Yeah, please go to the mic, because our goal is that by the end of this meeting, we want to be done with this document, right? So that's why I said I was going to take at least 5 minutes. So because this slide and the wording on the next diagram is really the only things to talk about.
Yeah. Hi, Roman Ginedu. We're talking about my comments.
Yeah.
I get that there's multiple semantics that we're talking about here. My read of section 4 is that that text is primarily the statutory definition of the information flow. I think perhaps a happy compromise of the text in section 5 and section 4 is not to change the text in section 5, which is talking about the caching behavior and the rest of it. Perhaps some text at the end of section 4 is to explicitly say, this is about documenting the whatever producer and kind of consumer behavior. That's not intended to constrain the fact that I guess arbitrary RATS elements can share stuff as long as they're not considered producers or consumers.
So if I understand right, you're saying you have no problems with this section, but there's a section that comes before this, which we don't have on the screen, right? Section 4 or whatever, that you're saying that one could be more clear. Would adding a forward reference to say, see section 5 for more details of how it's used, or?
Well, I guess the first thing I guess I'm checking is my understanding correct that arbitrary RATS elements can pass the thing as long as they're not considered the producers or the consumers, because that's my read of what that architecture is.
In a sense, yes, in the same sense as a router, right? So just like routers pass packets without knowing what the payload is. So yes, and that's because, the reason I say yes, that's talked about in the document where it says, oh, the roles and the conveyance mechanisms are conceptual, right? You could have one of the other roles that's an intermediary in any of the lines here when you're actually designing a protocol, right? You could have some other role that is actually an intermediary in between these lines here, well, that doesn't affect the architecture. That's just a protocol instantiation that says, oh yeah, it kind of bounces off this one as a router kind of thing. And so it doesn't preclude that. It actually allows that elsewhere. So that's why yes to your answer, because it's consistent with other statements in the document that say that. Conceptually, the message goes between these, and here the attester is involved only in the conceptual diagrams because he's actually allowed to cache it and have multiple different relying parties go out the right. And so that's not shown in the diagram because it'll complicate it. And that's what that text is. That's the bullet right above the diagram that says, yeah, there could be actually multiple lines to the right for different relying parties at different times.
Okay, so let me try it again. So I was operating under the impression that the architecture elements of RATS were defined by what they produce and consume. So you can say, well, what do you produce and consume? And then you understand what the thing is. What I'm hearing is that there are additional communication semantics or behaviors of those boxes that do not necessarily, that they can be done by kind of everyone.
In a sense, yes. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess perhaps,
but you're right about the fact that when you said about the definition part, yeah, that is absolutely correct. It says you would not call it evidence if it's actually consumed by something other than the verifier, right? If it was actually consumed and parsed by a relying party or whatever, it would never be called evidence. And so in that sense, yes, you're exactly right in saying that the producing and consuming is part of the definition. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I'll go back to what I said. I think the fix for this is leave 5 as 5 is, and in 4, I think I would benefit from additional language that says something to the effect of, consume or produce actually means this. There's this definition, and that's what we mean by that. And then there are other ways in which that can be passed, which is not produce and consume, and that's in scope for all the elements, no intent to constrain.
And see section 5 for
specific ways in which some of that might occur. Okay. Yeah, that would work for me.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Hank, and I think Roman just said it. Okay, I agree.
Okay. I don't know if a note taker probably couldn't have captured that fast enough. We'll probably have to go back to the recording to see if we can capture some of that wording or whatever. Okay. So next slide. Now we're on the second diagram, basically the same kind of comments in the second diagram. So here's this is the diagram for the background check model. Okay. And ooh, look, you notice the pretty printed version of the diagrams here. Okay. So here, you have the attester, and you see the evidence line goes over to the relying party, and there's a little curvy thing that goes through it and then goes up to the verifier. Okay, so this one is drawn a little bit differently, and that's because the text below it have a little bit of different considerations. It's not because it's not the case the relying party takes that and then presents it to different verifiers, right? So that concept just doesn't occur here. So the lines are a little bit different because the way things are maybe cached or whatever a little bit different. So here's what the text says. In this model, an attester conveys evidence to a relying party, which treats it as opaque and simply forwards it on to a verifier. So in the sense, it really is more like a router, right? It doesn't do anything with it. It doesn't even say anything about caching, right? The verifier compares the evidence against its appraisal policy and returns an attestation result to the relying party. The relying party then compares the attestation result against its own appraisal policy. And the resource access protocol, that's the horizontal line there, between the attester and the relying party, includes evidence rather than an attestation result. That evidence is not processed by the relying party, right? So the main part is the first sentence and the end of the last one, okay? So here it really is just a pass-through, okay? And so it terminates at the transport layer, but so the end-to-end connection just goes all the way through it. And so that's why it's kind of curved straight through there, because it's more like, in the routing sense, it's be like a layer 2 termination where layer 3 just forwards, right? That'd be the analogy here.
Yeah, Romadini, I guess same comment, just to be very kind of explicit. I think if you have the appropriate caveat weasel words in section 4 that says, again, any RATS architectural element, it can opaquely transfer the things that it has to kind of other RATS elements, that would cover it as well. And if you want to talk about additional semantics inside the box, like caching the rest of it.
See section 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of up to you whether you define that. I mean, I think the key thing for me was making it really clear in section 4 that that is not the statutory information flow. That's you're defining by what's produced and consumed. As long as you define those, it works for me. Thanks.
Okay, gotcha. So the summary that I'm hearing is section 5 is okay. Section 4 we explained, and I'm going to kind of up level what you said. Details are in that. Section 4 says this is part of the definitions, and the definitions are based around producing and consuming, and other RATS rules may be involved as part of the conveyance process for those. Okay.
Dave. Oh, sorry, Thomas Harjona, MIT. I actually posted a comment on the chat, the same question. I think the word convey is too high level. That, I mean, versus pass through, because you're saying the word convey and opaque.
In this one in particular, it uses the word forward, right, in the first bullet here.
Because then the opaque.
We don't use. We use forward when we mean pass through here, and so that one's the more.
I understand what this means, but just for the new reader.
So just a quick process. Hi, Thomas. For those who are here live, if you can actually put yourselves on the queue in the meet echo so the people remote know that it's fine.
All right. Do we still state our name at the mic, given that we have to do that? Probably doesn't matter. Yes, we do. Okay. All right. I think that's it. So go ahead. Then you can go forward, but I think that was the last slide. So I think the last one is just any other question. Anything else that we missed? Because we believe that if we do this, we are done, and then it's past AD. I mean, we do this, and then Roman pushes it on to the next stage as past AD review, right? So because it's already gone through like multiple working group last calls and everything. So, all right. Thanks.
Romadini again. Yeah, on the process finesse, it's an AD review. So when we get the fixes here, we'll merge it. I'll put it into IETF last call.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Roman. So by the way, I'm not tracking the agenda all that tightly, given that we had 50 minutes of open mic. So your 5 minutes was actually 12 days, but it was productive.
I told you I said at least 5.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm letting people know if, the chairs are not following the time in the agenda. It's because we're making good progress and we have to be kind. Okay, I forget who was next on the agenda.
Lawrence.
Oh, Teep.
So the first slide, which we're about to see, describes the differences in EAT drafts 13 and 14 since the last IETF. So really 4 areas, some document reorganization that I think should help make the document a little bit easier to digest. The claim section, which you had like 20+ claims in it, now is divided into 4. So one section for the nonce, the major section about claims about the entity. Then there is a section that are claims about the token. For example, profile is about the token, not about the entity. It tells you something about the token. And then there's a section on including cryptographic keys in tokens. A couple of the sections were moved to appendices. So the core of the document now is substantially shorter. These were some things about, there were really good discussions earlier on about designing claims and about keys and endorsement and how that sets up. So they're not really critically normative to reading the document, so they're in appendices now, but they were good work and I didn't want to lose them. So that's the document organization. Then in terms of actual changes to the specification, for manifests and software evidence claims, those are pluggable, meaning you can put a lot of different formats in there. I switched to COAP content identifiers rather than CBOR tags because of the JSON support and other. So
Sorry to interrupt you, Lawrence. The remote folks are saying that we're having some difficulty seeing those slides.
Yeah, they're not, see, they're not the Meet Echo thing.
Yeah, we're still trying to work, Meet Echo is having some issues. So net is close.
okay, I'm going to keep going. So that was the switch to COAP content types. That seemed like a better solution overall for the pluggable software evidence and manifests. So we added the Spddx and Cyclone DX manifest types. So the manifest claim, it can be a COSWID or a suit manifest. Now it can also be an Spddx or a Cyclone DX. This is also pluggable, so it can be extended by other documents. It's open-ended. We can't really pick a winner here on manifest type, so it's a general pluggable thing, and we added the specification for how to do Spddx and Cyclone DX. The measurement results, which is just describing the results of measurements, not the results of a verification. That claim was reworked and I think works a little better now. It's more general, can represent measurements of things other than just software. Then there is a profile added. This is kind of an example profile. It's also a definition of a standard profile. An EAT profile specifically for EAT devices, EAT-constrained devices, EAT-on-constrained devices, so CBOR. I think that's the profile that most people are really looking at using for this, so that actually says things like use CBOR, no indefinite length encoding, use ES 256, 384 or 512 for the algorithm, and some things like that. So that I think that will help the profile issue a bit and give an example profile. So that's the specification changes. The CDDL was improved. We had a discussion in Vienna about where to define claim set and dependency on UCCS. That's resolved by just putting a definition of claim set in an appendix in EAT and saying that, there's other definitions of this in other documents and, they should all stay in sync. It's not a controversial definition or a difficult one, so I don't see an issue here. I mean, that was based on Karsten's suggestion that it's fine to replicate CDDL. So then all definition of UCCS is removed, but there is a socket, CDDL socket into which other EAT formats can be plugged. And then there's just a lot of CDDL improvements. It's actually validating JSON and CBOR examples. So the examples in the EAT spec are all validated in the document build process with the CDDL tool. And then there's just lots of wording improvements. The profile section was the biggest one based on comments from Elliot. I want to note there that one of the things I really did there was make reference to what are almost profile sections in CBOR and in Cza. I mean, and there's actually documents, Cza documents that are profiles. I don't remember the thing, but they actually call them call themselves a profile document. Ned. Oh, okay, I see. We switched screens here. Let's see now. Yeah, I can't see my slides now. And Hank is in the queue. That's a pocket dial.
I was just confused by there being no slides. I was like, yeah, maybe I should wait, and then I forgot. So Brandon and I were quickly exchanging on Zulip, cool Zulip, by the way, that the phrasing in the EAT ID says, SW evidence can contain a suit manifest, but a manifest cannot be evidence.
Okay, that sounds wrong.
Yeah. So so that's a nit.
I mean,
That's highlighting,
the
yeah.
.EAT sounds wrong, not you. But yes. I mean, if you get that in the notes or file an issue, just so I don't forget. And then there was a bunch of, I wasn't quite finished with the previous slide. But mostly just, I think the profile thing was the main thing I wanted to mention here. The rest of it is just, the last bullet there, the relationship of evidence to attestation results. Basically, what it means to forward claims that are in evidence in attestation results. You take a claim that's in evidence, goes through the verifier, and gets sent to the relying party in attestation results. So there's text in there that describes what that should mean, and basically says you need to understand the verifier's policy to know what's going on there. You can't just, I mean, it doesn't mean that you can automatically trust those or that they automatically mean something. So, and that was again an outcome of discussions at IETF114. Okay, next slide. So this is the work in the EAT queue. I think the security considerations need some work. Comments on that, please. I have a fairly large set of comments on the introduction and the abstract and some kind of higher level things that I haven't processed yet. Some of these are from Elliot's review and from other comments. So I'm working through those. Then there's a bunch of other little inconsistencies that I'm working through. So I think those are all straightforward. I don't see any need for big discussion on those. Then there's two possible minor improvements that are kind of standing open right now. One is about the nonce. Right now, EAT says nonces are absolutely required, but there's the timestamp based freshness that's in the RATS architecture, and it seems like EAT should accommodate that. It's probably not a difficult thing to do. And that would make nonce optional if you're doing the time-based one. So comment on that if you think that's a good thing or not, or contribute a PR or not, or something like that. And then the other one is, since we have a standard profile in EAT for CBOR, we might consider having a standard profile for JSON. I think that was another suggestion. So I haven't made any attempts at writing that or know what that would look like, but that was a suggestion. So that's it for now.
Oh, you read me.
Oh, they're just leaving. Oh, no? Okay.
No,
Okay.
no. Question on endorsements. There was a lot of discussion on endorsements and can they be delivered through a testers unsigned? What was the disposition of that?
So I mean, EAT is kind of neutral to endorsements.
But you can deliver it from an attester. That was an open discussion. Yeah.
Can I answer that as a co-editor?
Sure.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Are you talking specifically about security levels as an endorsement?
That's one example.
Okay. I think I've said this before, but generally, from a semiconductor manufacturer perspective, in the ARM ecosystem for nowadays, not just ARM, but attestations generally don't treat endorsements the way the TCG does. So really, I want to make sure that we have our terminology correct. Are you using endorsements the way the TCG is defining it? Because the way I understand it, an endorsement that the TCG, as defined as TCG, and Ned, you actually posted this on the mailing list several months ago, is essentially a certificate provided by the manufacturer that a relying party can use in its assessment of an attestation and its assessment of the security assurance of an attester.
By the terminology, I'm not really trying to be strict to one or another. I'm just trying to figure out how do you deliver claims that really should not be generated by an attester. So I'm trying to find the logical way where things that can come from elsewhere are meaningfully delivered. And that's the open question that I didn't understand the closure of.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't think I would call the security level claim an endorsement. I haven't been thinking of it as an endorsement. And I think there were some email threads around this that didn't get settled. And I guess we should take those up again to kind of really understand what endorsement means. I mean, I know I've definitely thought some about that, but I've been focused on other details lately, so. It seems a pretty important question to me, what endorsement means.
Okay, we need to move the queue, and then we've got some, sorry, I have to cut the queue.
Just wanted to say, if I may, that probably when talking about security level, it's
Right, just put it in the chat, please. The
Yeah.
queue is closed.
So yeah, Giri, I understand from the EAT point of view, that is true, but as ARM is a co-author of CORIM, and they definitely do not treat endorsements like you just highlighted, I would not give ARM as an example here, because I think ARM definitely uses, or includes at least, the definition of endorsement from TCG. It's no, not a TPM, from DICE, from Mars, from any kind of endorsement that goes with remote attestation in the world. So just highlighting that.
Okay.
Also, Dave, maybe get that. This action bunch, I actually wanted to come here because time-based freshness. There are few interaction models. We are planning maybe an IANA registry for. It's a very fresh idea from yesterday, and that might go into the reference interaction model. So if you're doing nonce and time-based, you might also do epoch ID, and then you would be interoperable with this IANA iterations of how to do things, and maybe Dave has something to say for that.
Okay, so the chairs will be compiling a list of what we see as the open issues where we don't see closure and working group consensus, so that we can help make chair decisions on that to help this document progress further. We may hold an interim meeting soon, depending on the length of that. It's probably likely to be able to help process this more quickly.
Thank you.
I think Hank's comment we can cover in the open mic later, because there may be another minute on that where I want to comment on that, but I'm not going to do that now. I got up here to say that I think the EAT document, other than the work in the queue or whatever, I think the EAT document is okay with respect to their questions that have come up, meaning I think there are things that do not necessarily, I mean, even endorsements, right? Whether you can do endorsements in the EAT format or not, you don't have to change the original EAT document. If you were to say, I'm going to do an endorsement in an EAT format, you can do that. So in other words, I don't think that that is something that will, in my opinion, result in any changes here. That's not why I put in my name in the queue. Why I put my name in the queue is to make the same point on a different topic. One of the things that came up at the hackathon is something that Lawrence and I talked about, and we believe that the EAT document is fine, and just wanted to report that out to the rest of the document. And this had to do with the manifests. When Lawrence talked about this, he said it was a socket. Okay. At the Teep table, we came up with a request to have a different type of format in the manifest, where the manifest right now says it's the entire manifest, not a reference to one. And we said, okay, gosh, it sure would be nice if you could have a reference to a manifest. Okay. But we said this is a socket, which means you can do that in an extension document, which does not hold up the EAT spec. So I just wanted to report out that I think the EAT spec is perfectly fine, and we can do that in an extension. So I just wanted to report the discussion Lawrence and I were having with the rest of the working group. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thomas?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay, EAT media types. Next, please. Right. Okay, I will. Okay, so this is a document that Lawrence, Henk, and I have put together to register a bunch of media types that are applicable to EAT payloads. And this is in a separate document from the EAT spec because at the time we discussed the topic on the mailing list a few months ago now, the fear was this would cause scope creep and delay EAT. And so we packed the definitions and the registration into this separate doc that has a normative dependencies on both EAT and UCCS without bloating those two. And the main use case is for media types is, the usual. So you need to carry some RATS conceptual messages, say your evidence or your attestation results using some type agnostic REST API that is layered, say, on top of HTTP or CoAP, and you want your clients and servers endpoints to be able to correctly tag their payloads and do content negotiation and whatnot. And you also want your brokers, say your load balancers, your API routers, to do their job without having to snoop into L7 too much, and all this usual fun stuff. And as you can see from the picture, it has a quite rich type system, and basically this document creates a new media type for each of the productions in the grammar. So you have the naked claim sets in a web token and the detached bundle. These are the three main things, and you have to times two those because each of them allows for either a CBOR or a JSON realization. So we have 6 new media types in total. Next, please. Next, please, because and I have a table, yeah, exactly, with all the types and the names. So we have COT and JOT, so we have the 2 DEBs and the 2 tagged claim sets, all under the standards 3 with a type application and a nice subtype that starts with EAT-. And all but the web tokens also have the +JSON +CBOR suffix. And COT and JOTs don't, because JOT is not +JSON, and we wanted symmetry. Yeah, next, please. Right, and on top of that, so we also define a media type parameter for the profile. This is completely optional. So certain APIs may entirely disregard this existence, and some other may instead want to make use of it. For example, as I said before, it can be used to pass the content of the EAT profile claim to the upper layer processors while in transit, right? So to help the API routing infrastructure. And more generally, it gives you a scalable type system that that fully mirrors the extensibility of it. And I've added a few examples in the next few slides, but we can skip over them. They are basically example about content negotiation. So next, please. Yeah, here is a successful negotiation where the client is submitting some evidence for verification, and yeah, everything goes okay. So the content type of the evidence is okay. The attestation results format are acceptable, and therefore everything is finalized with a 200 okay. In another example that is in the next slide, again here we have the same client submitting evidence for verification, but this time the content negotiation goes wrong. So you have 415 support and media type report from the server side because the evidence is not in a supported format, and the server is able to tell the client which media types are acceptable for the service. And then a second example of failed negotiation in the slide that follows this one. Please, Ned, if you could scroll. Yeah, this one, if the thing ends up in a 406 not acceptable because the client is requesting the format of the attestation results to be of a certain profile and of a certain media type, and that is not compatible with the server side, which can then reply and say, no, can't do that, sorry. I can only do this and fill the accept header. So it's really that simple. And so next slide, please. I think is the adoption. Yeah. So the question is whether the working group wants to adopt this thing or not. Yeah. So the question is for you, for the floor.
So the question is, has anybody reviewed the document? Or not authors? So we'd like to have a couple reviews, and then we can solicit feedback on readiness for adoption on the mail list.
Awesome.
Mary, you were on the queue. I don't know if you had a question.
I already argued for adoption on the list. You haven't said no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true.
I did hear it. I said please adopt.
Yeah. Gary Mundy, Qualcomm. I have no objection to adoption. I think it should be adopted. Thomas, this is a question for you. So we've, at least in FIDO Alliance, we've done interops with the existing media types using each in its CW, in its COT form. And I've recommended to the working group there that we stick to the existing media types in the case that there are content filtering middle boxes. Now, are you planning to put any recommendations in this document as to when these media types should be used in place of the existing COT, JOT, and CBOR media types?
That was not my intention. I think they are just, we just create these entries in the registry. So if your API wants to use it, then use it. Otherwise, use whatever you think is better.
Okay, but I think if there's some existing implementations that maybe don't recognize these media types and a tester is producing them, then that may fail. So I think there may be some interoperability issues from that perspective.
I don't know, Gary, because if you're using an API, you have to stick with the rules of that API. You have to know what the URLs are, what the media types are, what kind of interaction model you're supposed to use when talking to that server endpoint. So I'm not sure it's the case that someone an attester can just create evidence, wrap it in the media type, and send it over to a URL and
okay.
And pretend that this will work,
Yeah. No, understood. Thanks. The other reason I recommended against it, though I didn't put this in writing, was that there are content filtering mailboxes and particularly the dangerous ones that actually can intercept TLS connections, it might actually be better to disguise attestations in a more general media type. Have you thought about that? So for instance, if the media type is actually available to the middle box, they may say, oh, this is an attestation media type. And if it's engaging in some undesired or unexpected behavior, they may actually drop it, even though the attestation might be very important to the media, to the communication session.
That's an interesting consideration, and I haven't thought about that, but I think this will, become apparent when we use it. We cannot say that is going to happen upfront. We need experience, and if we say that, in some specific environments or deployments that is the case, then based on the experience, we can write something up and amend this. But for the time being, I'm not sure there's sufficient evidence to actually write this thing up in the way that you put forward.
Okay. We can consider for maybe later in the security
Yeah,
consideration section as
absolutely.
you start to develop. All right. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Okay. Queues closed. Make it quick, Dave.
The Teep working group, the Teep protocol now has a dependency on this document. And that's because it defines a neat profile. And it has to have a way of communicating that in, content type and accept headers. And so if this could be expedited so that this could actually get to RFC before the Teep protocol, right? The Teep protocol, I would say, is not imminent. It's stable, but not imminent, right? Then that would be ideal. If for some reason this was going to not be adopted or take a very long time, we'd have to find some alternate approach in Teep, which would cause problems. So that's why adopting this sooner or later is preferred from Teep. Thank you.
Okay, so we need to confirm, do a call for adoption on the mail list. So, we'll need several people, not just one, put support for it.
We need more reviewers as well.
So this is Hank. I know the queue's closed, but the working group call adoption is calling for review, right? So
They're coincident, Henry. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Okay, this is quorum. Right. We're back with it. Can you give me the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, this is just a refresher. Quorum is concerned with providing this info and data model for describing the kinds of RATS conceptual messages that are known as endorsements and ref values. So this is the junction between attestation verifiers and the supply chain that creates the attester whose evidence these verifiers are supposed to verify, right? So if you look at the yellow object there, that's what Quorum does, and the red arrows. The rest is completely out of scope of Quorum. In particular, appraisal policies are not in scope. So next, please. Okay, so we presented Quorum a couple of times previously, and we asked for adoption. And the working group response was pretty positive, but unfortunately, ref values and endorsement were not in scope of Charter 01. And so we had to update the charter for expanding scope enough that supply chain provisioning was covered. Next, please. So the good news is that now we have a main deliverable, 2 standardized interoperable data formats to declare and convey endorsements and ref values, and a related milestone too. And thanks to everybody for the discussion and for the big push to get the update over the line. Thanks in particular to Roman for being instrumental in this work. So next, please. Because in the meantime, we have published 03, and that was a major revamp, and there was there was internal triggers, but also the Carl's Wallace review was very important for us to push us in this direction. We also have open source tooling that is available to anyone who wants to play with it. and it is, of course, a work in progress because the format is a work in progress. But we are starting to see protocol extensions based on quorum, and Carl's TAs, which I think he's going to present next, is the major example of that. And we also have application profiles built on top of quorum, like the PSA endorsement spec. And I think maybe Ned can confirm that Intel is also working on something similar. So yeah, obviously the authors would want to ask again for adoption. And you know, now that we are clear to go, basically, we have no impediment from the formal point of view.
So I haven't reviewed this document before or since IETF 113, but I reviewed it when Henk and I talked about it before 113. And I think I made this comment to Henk then, and that I'm being consistent, that I support adoption for the purpose of reference values. This was previously not allowed by our charter or whatever, and now it is, I think. And so in that sense, I support adoption. I am a little bit skeptical, given that I haven't read it, that it's actually appropriate for use for endorsements, okay, where I think something that is EAT-based is probably better for endorsements, but I don't think that should affect its call for adoption, okay, but that's my constraint on the scope. The reason that I have a difference there is that reference values, the reference value provider is typically providing a set of reference values, like the following claim values could be any of these, whereas in an EAT, it's typically a singleton that says the attester, here is the value. And for an endorsement, I usually think of that as a singleton that says this device over there that I manufactured has this single value. And so for that, I think an EAT format is probably more appropriate, but I have not reviewed the document to verify that right now. So I just want to say I support adoption for use for reference value providers, not necessarily, you know, regardless of whether it's used for endorsements, I support it for reference value providers, but endorsements is still a question in my mind.
Thank you.
So this is Hank, not belating the comment, just highlighting that we had a review from Microsoft Azure internal people using DICE, and they were like, yay. So I think that's a good sign.
So it would be good if they could provide that feedback and comment for support on the mail list, right? So that's another one that we need more reviewers. So, you know, as chairs, we look for at least 3 reviewers to provide feedback, comment, you know, the usual questions of, you know, willing to review, interoperability, implementation, and so on. So we can do that over the mail list.
Cool. Thank you.
Oh, you were fast, Thomas. The reason why I was starting to run the clock is I thought you were going to take 10 minutes. Was that it?
I'm done. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, we got Carl.
Hello. We'll talk about the concise TA storage spec next. If you haven't read it, which I'm guessing is probably most, link is here. Editor's copy is in that GitHub repo. And I did fork the Quorum guys' work, which was really good work, to implement this. So that's available in my repo. Depending on how this draft goes, we'll see if I send a PR for considering to merge. Next. Oh, actually, one thing on that. It does include a command line tool where you can create structures from the specs. So with the JSON template, use that tool and you can play with it to a pretty good degree. Next slide. What we're asking for is accept this as a working group draft and proceed on the standards track. Next. You know, why did we do this? Russ and I have a mutual customer who's wanting to extend the CA to consider more stuff at verification time. And that stuff includes attestations. There'll be a draft presented at LAMPS Wednesday morning on key attestations, adding those to a few different cert request protocols. When you step back and look at this, we're really implementing a verifier, and the inputs to the verifiers are many and varied, and the trust anchors are often, though, fairly tightly used, and putting them all in a great big pile and giving them lots of scope is kind of sad. So we define this to represent trust anchors with some limitations on the context. So next slide. So when we started out thinking about this, we looked first at the FIDO metadata syntax, since they do key attestations. If you look at that structure, it's a dictionary with attestation roots under keys that are authenticator IDs, which they don't call that out as a constraint, but it kind of functions as a constraint. We saw the presentation of quorum at the last IETF, thought there was a decent bit of overlap. We set out to write this as a profile of quorum, but hit some issues that led us to do it as an extension. So some of those issues are listed here. The life cycle of TAs and reference data is not necessarily the same. The use cases for trust anchors, in our view, are broader than the use cases for quorum. And then where the keys would fall in a quorum structure is tied to commids, and we didn't really see a good way to bend that to support non-commid use cases. Next. So at the outermost level, the structure is an array. It's an array of TA stores, which is the structure shown here, which has an optional language type, an optional store identity, required environments, then some constraints expressed as purposes and permitted or excluded claims, and then the keys themselves. Next slide. So the store identity was the last thing added to the spec, and that came after talking to the quorum folks. This was included to allow other artifacts in a quorum to reference a TA store. So the structure we use here is straight from quorum. You can name a store instance within that array using a UUID or text, and with an optional version. Next. The environments piece attempts to, this is what's most roughly analogous to the FIDO authenticator ID, where in that case, there was a very narrow target to use to look things up. Here it's fuzzier. So we pulled in a definition from COMID, that's the environment map. We pulled in a definition from COSWID, and that's the abbreviated SWID tag. And that's really just, it's the concise SWID tag definition with all the fields made optional except for one. And then a free-form text name. So next. In terms of constraints, overt constraints, the environments are kind of a constraint too. We have this EKU-like TA purpose where we list out different things you might verify with a trust anchor. We do have a draft written for LAMPs that we didn't submit before this IETF that maps all of these to OIDs. If this progresses, that'll follow suit. And there would likely need to be a registry for purpose values because this would need to be extensible. Next. Here we have just permitted and excluded claim values. And that's just using the definition straight from EAT. Next slide. And then keys. This is kind of the meat and potatoes. We require at least one trust anchor, and then you can include CA certificates if you want. The trust anchors, we define 3 different formats. A certificate, a bare public key encoded as a subject public key info, and an RFC 5914 trust anchor info structure. We've gotten an off-list comment that we should include JSON and CBOR formatted keys too, and that seems right to me. So we'll add that. I think just as a trust anchor expression, not to the CA's list, which seems appropriate, is just X509. Next slide. As far as security mechanisms, we inherit from quorum, which uses COSE, and we add the extra piece to verify using a trust anchor that has the COTS purpose asserted. Obviously, somewhere back down this line, there has to be some out-of-band bootstrapping. Next slide. Things we left out include how to use this stuff for verification. We have a draft written. It's not yet complete. Next. And actually on that point, it's not altogether clear where some of this stuff should go, because this spec sits sort of at an intersection between rats and lamps. So we'll see. Next slide. As far as high level questions in my mind, is the quorum extension the way forward? Had two voices on the list that support doing this as a quorum extension. I'm on the fence about how the environments are defined, whether or not we could squeeze out some common identity characteristics from the COMID and COSWID instead of having the environment map and the abbreviated SWID tag. And then similar questions around the constraints mechanisms. Do they adequately cover what we'd want to use to set up these limitations? Are they overkill? Should there be something extra? And so forth. And that's all I had, so except for questions. So we've got 2 in the queue.
Dave Taylor, thanks for presenting this. I didn't know about this until the presentation here, so very interesting. If I understand right, you're actually configuring the trust anchors themselves in the receiver. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, good. So we have a need for this in more than just RATS, right? So Teep relies on configuring trust anchors, Suit relies on configuring trust anchors. So my question is, do you think that this work is actually specific to RATS, or is this a more generalizable thing, and this gets to the answers to all the questions you have up there?
I think it's more general. I don't know where the best forum for it is. We chose here because quorum was the way that we chose to express this.
Sure. If it's not specific to RATS, I think we might actually reference and use this from Teep, and we might actually be able to reference and use it from Suit, for which one of the co-authors is a co-chair. And so I don't know if RATS is the best working group for this, but I think it's very interesting work. So that's why I'm asking these questions. So, I may have a follow-up after Kathleen goes.
I was also unaware, Kathleen Moriarty as a participant, I was also unaware of the draft. Should have been aware. Sorry, I'm not as tall as everybody else. Now, one thing, so I would like to follow it wherever it winds up, but in terms of like COSWID, how is adoption of that? Is that the right choice?
Well, I mean, this is early days for all of this stuff, right?
That's why I want to raise it now. So I think some consideration on what that format should be, if there's really adoption of COSWID or not, or is COSWID falling to the side in favor of other formats that are starting to pick up in terms of adoption?
From a high level, I want to get across the keys and some means of limiting where they fit, right? So that you don't leave trust anchors wide open like WebPKI, for example. We don't have as tight of a target as FIDO, which is what we looked at, and figuring out what the right environment expression and constraint expression is kind of the work to be done. We took this shot. We don't want to target things that aren't used that weigh us down. So I don't know. I mean, these are two questions I can't say that I could answer. Where should it be? I don't know. Is that SWID, I think, is used, but I don't know about COSWID.
SWID is used, but I think, and people who are at vendors, I am not at a vendor, I'm at Center for Internet Security. It seems that other formats are picking up traction now, and it seems to be dying off, but perhaps a survey of that would be useful. So that's actually something my team might be able to help with.
Well, that gets it
as a neutral entity.
At the question here, could we carve out some common characteristics? Maybe that's what we do, and then it could be used with a COSWID or used with something else, but isn't overtly defined in terms of anything else.
Right. So I don't have any answers, but I will offer, I have some interns that can help, and we're at a neutral organization. So if vendors want to talk to us and help us sort through what formats are being adopted, we would be happy to compile that.
Kathleen, maybe useful for you to list your organization. I'm sorry, what? You introduced yourself, but you didn't say your organization.
I did say it. Center for Internet Security.
Okay. Well, the good news is that if you're going to call for adoption, you said you want at least 3 reviewers. So I think we just counted 2. and we already had one, so we might be in good shape for reviewer count.
We-
No, not yet, but I'm saying we have some interest to sustain the review. That's all I'm saying.
Well, it gets to the question of scope and recs. Yeah.
All
Go
right.
ahead, Hank.
So first, a lot of things, unfortunately. Hi, this is Hank. So first I saw the CDD, I already saw, I read the draft. I see the high synergy and reuse of types, and I see how that helps your work. So I'm absolutely fine this being an extension of CORAM, speaking as one of the authors of CORAM.
Right.
Because that is just there, and re-implementing that would be like weird. And I'm happy that you find reuse in some of these structures. So excellent, thank you. Be it CoSWIT or something else, I'm pretty agnostic to. I'm very involved as a contributor to Spddx for 2 years now, and they just recently, for the 2.30 version, put in a pointer to CoSWIT because Spddx is not really good at being small. and so they were like, okay, if you want to have small file system references and such and characteristics, they can point to there. If you will go to a deterministic build, it's not interesting to you, to Git bomb references. And so, yeah, I think CoSWIT has its place in the IoT realm. It's definitely going to be the part of CORIM. But as Spddx matures, and that is meaning 3.0, there might be a concise SBOM. And maybe we can look at that, but that is years. This is next year. So that is there. That is very concise. There's no better, more concise way to go into the file system or anything else. So I'm happy to see it.
Well, on that point, CoSWIT just in the last week cleared its final hurdle, and that working group is actually
Roman
closing,
pushed.
so that's done.
Thank you, by the way. And then second close, curiously. Oh.
He was into it. Nothing else. So.
Was that done?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, to the idea of the binding of this to kind of CoSWIT, is there this idea that we can have format agility? And is that what you were thinking, kind of with regards to abstracting what you want to do to provide that flexibility?
There may be extensibility points we need to add here and there. You know, the keys already came up that way, and so there are probably a couple of those. But I also don't want to have extensibility everywhere, because then it's I don't know. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it. Thanks.
Okay. So I think what we can do is call for interest and topics. I think there were some questions raised with applicability and CoSWIT, Carl. So we can at least do that. And as you said, there were at least 2 organizations and individuals that were willing. Hank, I don't know if you were also raising your hand to help review and provide feedback and comments. Okay, you nodded. So,
and I'll post to the list once I know who I'm.
No, it's a call for interest. Yeah.
And we will volunteer somebody to help with the assessment of formats.
So mechanically, how does a call for interest lead to a call for adoption and so forth? I mean, is that a progression? I've not seen call for interest before.
It's a progression. Yeah,
okay.
It's the first step. Yeah. And I'm doing it just because there was a question of, you know, if it's broader, should it be in RATS or not? So, okay. Wow, almost on the money. 50 minutes. Next up, Simon.
Hi, wave if you can't hear me.
Yes, we can
Good.
hear you just fine.
Excellent, marvelous. First slide, please. Or next slide, please. Okay, so EAT collections is a proposal for an extension to the EAT top level object. And it's for use cases where there is no obvious or maybe varying top level signer. So currently your EAT must start with a CWT, WT, or DEB, a signed thing. But the collection, we came across various use cases where we don't necessarily have, hang on, just level, I'm getting horrible feedback. We came across these various use cases, in particular with our work on computational computer architecture, but also looking at things like which may have originally been based on cert chain, where there is not necessarily an obvious top-level signer, or it's something that can change. So looking at the cert chain example, because this really is people. If you're trying to build something from something like a dice chain, the leaf should be that last signer, which would need to encapsulate the other things, can change, or the number of items, objects within the token can change. So your opportunity to take these down into submods is quite constrained. And this is something we also ran across in ARM CCA, because the nature of the signer can change by deployment. Next slide, please. I apologize for the echo. I have no idea why. Let me try and toggle the audio. Is that any better? I can't hear you now, but you may be able to. Can you wave if that's better?
We're actually fine, Simon. We weren't hearing any.
Okay, sorry, yeah, okay, when I try and take the audio out from me, it takes me all out. Okay, I'm trying to, apologies for the feedback. I don't know quite what is happening. Is that any better? I've just lowered the volume from the room. Okay.
I think the issue maybe those that are remote, because we can hear you fine here in the room.
Okay. Okay, in that case, I apologize remotely. Okay, so this is to expand on that CC example. One of the fun things we get to play with in ARM is that, well, our targets can be many and varied in architecture, from sort of major scale cloud servers down to quite small things. So in looking at the design of Cca Attestation, essentially things came down initially to two logical parts of the token, and these are formed as each independent as each token. And the simplest form, which is you round trip to a hardware ROT every time and get something signed, but then because we have different components in charge of this, then what we would do is would pass a hash of one object to the other as a challenge, and effectively get everything signed in that way. And that fits quite nicely with Deb. However, if you're in a cloud server, that model doesn't work very well. You end up with nasty potential for bottlenecks. So we wanted to cache the platform key and sign it with a key that is created at various intervals in the workload object. And then suddenly the whole format, even though your individual tokens don't really change, your whole format has to change, because in there now you have a different top level signer, and it has to go into a top mod, into a submod. And there's potentially other pieces of work in the future which might introduce additional tokens. So this is kind of nasty, because you then have lots more code in places you don't want lots more code. Whereas we actually wanted to be able to just take process each of these tokens independently in a reference design. So instead of having to fully reformat the tokens, if each of these elements each of these is an element in a collection, they have no logical top level signer, but they have independent integrity, and they have a cross element integrity, then they can exist in the collection. So next slide, please. So the collection format is pretty straightforward. It's a tagged map, contains an optional profile claim, which enables you to identify the nature of the collection, and then one or more entries. And within those entries, those are your normal CWTs, DWTs, etc. And they can have their tags to be meaningful within the profile. And as I say, this only works if your security is custom defined, so that the integrity of each of the elements can be identified, and then integrity relationship is there, and that can be either one-to-one or in a chain style, or one-to-many. But we think this gives a lot of flexibility for this kind of scenario. Next slide, please. So draft 00 went to working group. I've had various comments back. The 01 went out addressing a few minor comments, and I've had some comments, more feedback, which was in things like, please emphasize the security considerations, and allowing for things like 1+ member. And that is it. So I'm actually, what I didn't put in here is I would like to pursue this for adoption, but I'm most interested in comments and review. And that was it.
Any comments or feedback? Okay, Thomas, you're in the queue.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, hey Simon, just to check this with you, you would need a new media type as well, right? Because this is top level.
Indeed, I wrote that down during your presentation.
Okay, cool. Cheers.
Yeah, so I've spent some time looking at this, and just a couple of comments that I've made. I'm not sure I made them publicly, but I'll make them publicly now. One of these is that I looked at whether EAT submods or the EAT deb could address the things, the issues that are listed here, and I think they actually cannot. So it did bring up some shortcomings in the way, the constructs that are in the EAT draft now. So from that point of view, yeah, there's some stuff that EAT's not handling in terms of, kind of more complicated nesting and aggregation of tokens. One of the use cases that I understand here is that I think Simon didn't go into is kind of nested tokens where one token is kind of attesting to the next token. I think that's similar to DICE, the way
Right.
DICE works. I'm not deeply familiar with that, but that was clearly something that is not handled well by EAT submods. And to me, there seemed like there was an interesting opportunity there to define some sort of new kind of submod or some new kind of nesting scheme for tokens that to sort of mirror what DICE does in EAT. I didn't want to do that in EAT because we've got enough work in EAT. But anyway, that's just a comment on that. There, I'm not really having a strong opinion one way or the other on this, but just stating there's clearly some areas that EAT is not addressing in this area.
So I have to admit, I haven't been tracking to see how many reviewers we've had in this draft. So, show of hands, who's reviewed the document? 2. Okay. Huh?
No.
Anybody in the chat remote, sorry?
Okay, yep, Thomas has.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so we can do solicit more reviews and pulse and see if there's interest, and then we can talk about adoption.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. Well, I have to thank for the second round of presenters for staying right on time, because we now have 20 minutes of open mic. Okay.
Kathleen Moriarty. I just wanted to mention that the attestation set draft is not dead. Somebody else is beginning to help work on it, so there should be a new revision sometime between meetings.
The attestation sets.
Attestation sets, yeah.
Okay.
So now I wanted to come back to the point that Hank made earlier at the mic, which came up at the hackathon about, so the topic here is freshness mechanisms in a registry. Okay, so the context is that in the Teep protocol, the Teep protocol is one that can accommodate multiple freshness mechanisms. In other words, whether you're going to use, say, the nonce claim or the timestamp claim, right? It can be negotiated. So the protocol lets you actually negotiate that, and then you use that with your EATs or whatever, whichever one it does. And so anytime that you have capability negotiation, you need an identifier to say what the thing is that you're negotiating. Okay, so currently, the posted version of the Teep protocol spec defines a registry that has currently 3 values, although you could argue whether that's the right number. Maybe you should only have 2, 4, whatever, that says nonce, timestamp, and epoch ID, although epoch ID is not really well defined yet, right? So that's why you could argue maybe that one doesn't go in the registry yet, okay? I did an early review and said, okay, what page should we put this on in the protocol registry? Because there isn't a page for like Teep parameters or whatever. Should they create another one? And so that begged this question of, is Teep really the only protocol that might be negotiating freshness mechanisms? Should this be on a Teep page? Should it be on a RATS page? And so if it should be on a RATS page that says, here's any protocol that wants to negotiate ones, here's a registry to have identifiers in, okay? If that goes on a RATS page, that means you probably want to mention this in a RATS protocol document. So Hank and I talked at the hackathon. It says, if we were going to propose this be a RATS registry, what document would we put it in? And Hank said, reference interaction models is probably the right place for it. And so that's why we wanted to bring it up here and see what the working group thinks, okay? Because if the RATS does not want to do this, we'll do it in Teep, but that seems to me like the wrong place. And that moving this registry definition into the reference interaction document was what Hank and I would prefer. So we wanted the working group's feedback on that.
Somebody had a thought about it. Means of music. Okay, so since you're referencing it as a claim, I can see the value in bringing it to RATS.
Yeah, the freshness mechanism is, how you do in, say, in an EAT, for example, do you use the, what is it, the IAT or whatever it is, it's the name of the claim for a timestamp, and nonce is the name of the claim for the nonce, and so on. It says, which one of those am I going to be using, right? Now, you could argue, which I'll argue against, to say you could put that as part of the EAT profile, okay? And say you have one profile that uses timestamps and a different profile that uses nonces, and they're a required claim in 2 different profiles, okay? As opposed to a single profile where they're both in the optional claims and you must use one or the other, and the profile says that. Okay? But that's how EAT profile is defined right now. So you got to use one or the other or whatever based on whatever you negotiate, but they're both optional because you got to have one of them, but neither of them is mandatory, right? And this gets to Lawrence's point that says maybe nonce shouldn't be mandatory, that should be optional, and I gave him a big thumbs up. Says yes, because we can negotiate use of timestamp instead of that. But the rationale to not put it in mandatory in the profile is that this is only one of many different axes in the profile. We don't want to blow out and have an explosion of number of profiles because it varies by freshness mechanism and varies by this and varies by that and so on. That says really it should be an orthogonal parameter in a different numbering space, not part of the OID or URI that's the profile definition.
Okay, so if I were to summarize, your question is that the notion of freshness has more value than just inside of Teep. It's the notion of we could bring it into RATS. The proposal is to put it in the reference interaction models draft, which I think is fine. So my suggestion would be to kickstart that discussion in the mail list and work towards putting that as a proposal and just inserting it into the draft. And you'll get feedback that way.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up here to make sure nobody said that is a really bad idea. That should stay out of scope for RATS or whatever. It sounds like there would be no objections that people are coming up with right now to doing that, right? We can put it on the list or whatever, but it means we could go ahead and put it into the document as part of, the document review process of that.
I'm just saying you could do both in parallel as you're putting it in the doc, kickstart the discussion, right?
Yeah, because this will remove text out of the Teep protocol document, enabling the Teep protocol document itself to progress faster through the review process. So, all right, thanks.
Working group chairs have been asked to remind everyone that the only exceptions to not wearing a mask in the room is if you are presenting. So if you're up at the mic or you're sitting down, keep a mask on this week. Thank you.
Well, oh, yes, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
Mask on for you. Yes.
Can I do it or not? Okay. All right.
No, you have
You know, probably.
That's what I just said.
He wants to present to that mic.
If you're here.
Oh, okay, I can.
Go up to that mic. You can present now, it's open mic.
What is the rule?
That's the rule.
Okay, only presenters.
Not give enough
You
space for the
can
audience.
take the mask off.
Now you're 6 feet from the rest of the audience.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. I apologize. Yeah, Gary Mundy, I'm going to comment back on Dave and Hank's earlier suggestion. First off, protocols. Right now with the EAT draft, there are 3 freshness mechanisms defined. There's the nonce, there's the CTI, and then there's the IAT issued at the time. CTI is, I forget what they call it, some sort of index. So, the thing is that if we define it with the RATS, there are other specifications, like for instance, the FIDO device onboard specification that use CWT in more broader context than attestation. So that's what I would be concerned about. The other thing is when you talk about registries, registries can be, in theory, extensible. And the EAT spec, I don't see any reason to expand beyond the 3 freshness mechanisms that are already there. So just want to make sure that that understanding is common.
Okay, Lawrence and then Hank.
Yeah, so
Oh, you took yourself off?
so I don't know, have a strong opinion one way or the other, but a few questions. One question is, if I didn't think that the number of freshness mechanisms was that open-ended, like there isn't really more than a few, 2 or 3. So why do we need a registry? Okay. The other thing is, why are we negotiating freshness mechanisms but not negotiating crypto algorithms or something else? Okay, so there's maybe a basic interaction model here, like particularly with EAT, there's definitely no negotiation there. Like COSE, there's no negotiation there. So, okay, so you understand where I was going.
Yeah, so just to answer, in the Teep protocol, it negotiates both cipher suites and freshness mechanisms and the handshake. So one side says, here's my supported set of freshness mechanisms, often just one, right? And here's my set of cipher suites. And then in the response, it can then include an attestation payload, which could be evidence or could be attestation results if it's in the passport model, right? Okay, so on the question of are there additional ones besides those 3? And this gets to the question of the reference interaction models document is technically not EAT specific, and technically neither is the RATS architecture, right? And that is because it accommodates proprietary formats, right? At the Teep hackathon table, we had people using a proprietary attestation format, meaning SGX reports. Okay, SGX reports don't use suit or EAT claims at all. Do they have a freshness mechanism? Sure. Okay. It's a proprietary one that's existed for a long time, right? ARM probably has one too that exists in their already deployed attestation mechanism. And so the nonce claim, for example, has a specific set of byte size ranges, right? It must be between, I remember what it is, 8 and 64 bytes or something like that, right? So you can imagine somebody that says, well, I've got a 6-byte one or a 72-byte one or whatever. Therefore, it's not the same thing as what nonce would be registered as, because that means a nonce claim. You could argue that that needs a different freshness mechanism number in the registry. And so somebody like a vendor like Intel or ARM should be allowed to register a freshness mechanism that's the one that they're already using. Okay, so there might be 3 standard ones, or whatever the number is, 2, 4, and there could be vendor-specific ones for things that are already deployed that are in use right now. So that's why it would be a registry.
Sorry, just to jump the queue, but briefly, I think there is a bit of a negotiation thing for EAT through profiles, as Thomas showed in his media types thing.
Hi, this is Hank. Maybe probably, I don't know, closing remarks on this topic. The interaction models basically are flavors of these freshness characteristics that we have. And so that's why we put it in there, because to differentiate those. And I think, again, as Dave already highlighted, there are existing solutions that will benefit from classification like that, and they can easily tailor it around them. And yeah, I heard that, especially for the epoch ID, for example. Yeah.
Any other comments, issues? Nope.
None of this one.
Okay, Hank is putting himself on the queue. Come on.
Totally different topic, open mic topic. I'm not going there. We did not provide an update on the DAA ID, but we just recently, initiated by Dave, had an internal review round on comments on inconsistency in the text. So that's why we did not provide an update today. There's working on this, and I think we are pretty close to getting a first working group last call. But let's find out. Okay, we have to do this internal round. We have to go to the list, get the questions out there again. Does it look fine to you? And if that is somehow stable, I think maybe before November we can call. But again, I wanted to just give a small update on DAA. It was not worth a slide. So yeah, but we're working on this.
Presumably the same on reference interaction models.
Yeah, we had that.
Okay.
That was the reference interaction model presentation right there.
Yeah. Okay, so to recap from today, the device subscription draft, we'll do an early Yang review. The is it AR4C? R4C draft? You're waiting for closure on the EAT draft. EAT media types, we'll do a call for adoption. Same thing for the foreign draft. We'll do a call for interest on the TA scores, Carl. And shoot, the last one, Simon's, I forgot to write that one. Simon's draft, we'll also do a call for interest. And then the chairs need to reconvene to go through the remaining EAT issues and see which ones are the gating factors that may or may not hold up the working group last call to progress on the next step. So, and then Gary and Lawrence, if you can stick around since we're ending early. Carl, too. We wanted to check.
Hi, this is Roman, and I think we also said that if we needed one, we would do an interim meeting, right, Kathy?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you were saying. Thanks.
Yes. Sorry if I wasn't clear. Okay, I think with that, we can adjourn and give you guys 7 minutes back. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
On the architecture document, our goal is to post it before the end of the week and get Roman to act before before we leave Philadelphia. So.
Yes. What's it there?